Hi everybody, this is the Hollywood Rabbi. I'm right here in the heart of Hollywood with this week's Torah portion. It's called eira, and it means, and he appeared. This is the second Torah portion in the book of Shemot. In order to understand this week's Torah portion, you really have to go back to last week's and understand what had happened. Remember, Moses had left the palace in Egypt because he saved a slave from being beaten to death. He interceded and he killed the Egyptian taskmaster. Moses had a great, deep feeling for other people and he advocated for them. And when he got to the land of Midian, when he escaped from Egypt, he again was there to save the day. His wife Zipporah was being harassed by some shepherds. He advocated for them and helped them, protected them. And Moses got married. He was living in the land of Midian. He was a shepherd by trade. That's quite a leap, going from living in the palace as the son of the most powerful man to living as a shepherd. But nonetheless, he was a very special man. He really had feelings for other people, and that's what really made him different. And he couldn't go on living and not speaking up and advocating for his brothers and sisters in slavery. So one day, one of his sheep ran off near a cave, and he came to look for him, and he found a very supernatural sight. He saw a burning bush, and the bush was just kept burning, but it wasn't consumed. So he's in that it must be a supernatural event, and then he hears the voice of God. God explains to him that he plans on taking the Jewish people out of slavery and bringing them into the wilderness, and then eventually bringing them back into their land, the land of Israel. So the humble man that Moses was, he said, I don't think I'm cut out for this job. Could you imagine he demurred to God? Moses was a reluctant hero. And he said, well, I'm not a good speaker. I'm heavy-tongued. I have a heaviness with the language. You know, Moses was just a down-to-earth guy. You know, he was a take-action kind of guy. You know, he wasn't what we call a schmoozer, somebody who was into small talk. So we're not quite sure if he was talking about a speech impediment or if he just felt he wasn't cut out for the job of being a leader, because part of being a leader is being an influencer, an orator, somebody that can get people to change. So God said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. Everything will be fine. You can go with your brother. The brother will help speak for you. This story about asking Moses to go back to Egypt and advocate for his brothers and sisters, for the slaves to be free, was unheard of, because in the ancient world, everything was about power. It was the social pyramid. Who was at the top of the pyramid? It was the Pharaoh and his leaders, and Pharaoh was considered God. Social justice wasn't being done. It was just all about power and conquest and who can take over which land and who can take over which place. This is the first time that God is actually telling the people to rise up against authority and to move towards freedom and liberation. Completely unheard of at that time. Because usually when people were conquered, they would change the religion. They would become whatever the religion was then. But the Jewish people clung to their religious beliefs, didn't believe in polytheism, and they knew that they had to live in a society where they could practice the religion, where there's social justice and there's community outreach and there's righteousness, and charity, and there's equity, and there's law, and there's justice. So when Moses was asking Pharaoh and he threatened him with these plagues, a lot of times, as tyrants do, they say, oh, I'm going to change, don't worry, you know, when they're backed up against the wall. And then he said, you know, call your God off, tell him to stop the plague. And then he would stop the plague, and then he would harden his heart and do it over again. And Moses was getting frustrated. And again, he went to God. He says, I don't think I'm the right guy for this. I'm not heavy in my language. I'm not able to influence him. I'm not able to inspire Pharaoh to change. But he was just so set in his ways. He just kept promising that he would let the people go, and then he would change his mind. And he would harden his heart. And the way the commentators understood it is that, a lot of these leaders like Martin Luther King and Barack Obama and Winston Churchill, they were great orators. They could really inspire people. But Moses was there for the long run. His words and his message of God lasted for thousands of years because he cared about the big picture. He was a take action kind of guy. He wasn't there for the small talk, and that's why he had a hard time, even later on, convincing the Jewish people to go and take back their land in Israel. He just ended up staying in the wilderness for 40 years. That wasn't his talent, but he was a man who had a lot of empathy. And you may ask yourself, why do we spend so much time talking about the past? These events happened 3,500 years ago. What relevance do they have for us today? And as the great philosopher George Santayana once said, those who do not remember the past are condemned to relive it. In order to have a successful future and think about future redemption, because they say that the redemption that happened in Egypt was the little leagues compared to the future redemption that's going to happen. We need to learn that we have to advocate for one another. And how do we really understand God? We have to understand him through his attributes: compassion, kindness, justice, community outreach, reaching beyond yourself and making the world a better place. That's the things that we have to emulate. And when we see that someone is being persecuted or someone's not being treated fairly, just like Moses did, we have to intervene, because there's laws and there's justice, but it doesn't come knocking at your door. If you want your leaders to follow those laws, you've got to encourage them and get people to support it and ask for it. We have to see change through legal channels. We'll continue next week learning more about this week's Torah portion and how Moses ended up changing the world and creating a new world order that is not just based on power, not just based on conquest, but based on social justice that's provided by the Ten Commandments. This is the Hollywood Rabbi wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom and a wonderful weekend. I want to thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you next time. God bless everybody.